Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm telling you how you can keep your career mode transfers realistic on FIFA 23. I've got some examples from the save that I'm playing offline with New York City FC, so I'm going to be giving you examples of every single tip as we go through. And let's get started straight away with my first tip. In my opinion, the most important part of keeping your signings realistic is when you're getting a new player to join your club. If we go over to the transfer hub, you can see the first part of my system to keep my transfers realistic, which is fully scouting every player before I add them to the transfer hub. This helps me with the second part of my rule, which is that I don't sign players who are more than 1 or 2 overall better than my current best player. You can see here we've got Maxi Morales and Mika Dragovic, who are both 75 overall. This means I can't really go out and sign some of the suggested players that my scouts have picked out. If you go on the scout report here, you can quickly see we've been recommended like Lautaro Martinez or Ciro Immobile, even Victor Osimhen. They're all way too good for the MLS, and I don't think it's super realistic if I did sign any of them. If I was going to sign a player who was over that overall rating, I could possibly go for someone who did used to play for New York City FC. If they are maybe getting a bit old and they're in the 80s rating, I think that could be a very realistic way of bringing a bit of a better player back to the club. Let's say, for example, my starting 11 starting overall is around 75. The best player you should really only be signing is a 77. Don't improve your team way too fast, otherwise the game can get a little bit boring. On the other side, selling players is a bit different. I try and keep my squad down to around 30 players. Most of these are going to be bad rated youth players at the bottom. You can see, for example, right here we have 7 players from Baraza to O'Toole who are probably never going to play in the MLS for me. Even players like Zelalem probably aren't going to feature too much. If you don't hoard players, if you make sure you're not always rejecting an approach, try and offer the player a new contract every time you reject a transfer. If an offer comes in from a team that's better than yours and is over market value, the chances are in real life the team would accept it. So make sure you give it some consideration and don't just reject every single offer you receive. If you want to try and keep your overall better, then this sort of features in with the signing players. Don't sign players that are massively better than your existing players. For example, this guy here, Dragovic, he probably shouldn't have been signed. He's 19 and he's already my joint best player. Someone like this probably wouldn't join an MLS team, but I'm pretending that I got him through the MLS draft. However, he's easily going to get way too good for the MLS way too fast. I can imagine by the time he's 20 years old, he could be in about 78 rated, 21, I imagine he'll be about 81 rated depending on his potential. This means that I'm going to have to sell him pretty soon, and that kind of thing does happen in the MLS. You see players who came through at 19, they get their move to the Bundesliga or the Premier League, and they flourish from there. So try and keep the overall realistic means selling players when they get too good for your team. The next thing I'm trying to do, and you can see this easily in the transfer hub, is I'm trying to keep my signings a bit more realistic with the nationalities and demographics of the players I'm signing. If we head over to the transfer history page over here, and we go to my club, you can see here we got the free agent here of Dragovic, who I mentioned before, but we also signed Josh Sargent, who's not really done too well in Europe, and Jordan Sibatu, again, is another American player. So because these guys are American and there's a ton of Americans who play in the MLS, of course, because it is in America, that means that I think these signings are pretty realistic for a team like New York. Being in New York, you have quite a bit of pull, so you can imagine that players who haven't done too well, like Josh Sargent in the UK, would be interested in coming to play for one of the most well-supported teams in the MLS. Every single league has different demographics. This could be something to do with age. Some teams, like the MLS, for example, have a very high average age. Some nations, like England, have quite a big focus on having foreign players, and some other leagues prefer a different style of play. For example, Bundesliga requires a ton of stamina, so if you're signing low stamina players, they might not be that realistic. Nationality and age are the 2 easiest ways to measure, and each league will have specific stats for each. For example, the Premier League is 40% English, the Championship is 65%, and League 2 goes all the way up to 80%. This is a common feature all over the world. The further down you go, the more domestic players you can sign. A tip for you here is to try and keep your squad realistic by limiting your players to a certain nationality or a certain age group. This could force you to take a worse player who doesn't quite fit in, and this will only add to the challenge of playing your FIFA career mode save. This happens thousands of times each transfer window in real life, but you hardly ever choose the worst player when you're playing FIFA career mode. Before every save with a team I'm not familiar with, including this one here with New York City, I made sure to check Wikipedia, Google News, and I searched them on the BBC, because at least every team will have one interesting article or one interesting thing you need to know when you're playing them on career mode. They could be owned by a certain nationality, they could be under an embargo in real life so they can't sign players on FIFA, or they could even have a unique restriction, something like Chivas in Mexico or Athletic Club in Spain, where they can only sign certain nationalities. If you can't find anything like this for a certain club, you can always invent your own. For example, with my save I'm managing as Pirlo, so maybe I could pretend that New York City were bought out from the City Football Group by an Italian billionaire. This means I could go out and sign a ton of Italian players, and I think that could be interesting. Or I could pretend we have an academy in somewhere like Brazil. We do have quite a few good Brazilians, for example Teles Magno is one of my best players. We could pretend we got an academy in Brazil because of the transfer of Teles Magno. We could also pretend a team is in huge debt and you can't sign any players and you just have to sell them and rely on your youth team. Once you've come up with your restriction, you can even come up with full season-long storyline objectives that you need to fulfill to try and overcome these restrictions. Maybe you need to sign 4 Italian players, maybe you need to bring through at least 10 Brazilian youth players, or maybe you could have to try and raise 100 million in transfer fees before you can sign a new player. For the Youth Academy, you should always try and do the training manually until you have an A grade in each variation. This of course does make your players improve faster, but you'll also get to know some of your players' abilities for shooting, dribbling, defending, etc. You can also invest time in younger players, not just your best 11. Coming from Ultimate Team, it might seem strange, but sometimes you should run with a weaker team than your best 11 players. Also, you can also look for young, cheaper players on the transfer list. You can then develop them, train them up, and then sell them for a lot more money than you originally bought them for. If we have a look on the transfer list right here, you can see a lot of them are fairly old, but you have got players who currently are in the MLS. Maybe we could sign some of these guys up, train them up, for example this 26-year-old, and then sell them for way more than we bought them for. One last thing you should know is that you don't always have to play in England. You could always give Germany, France or Spain a go. They'll have different transfer restrictions, you'll have different rules, you can sign different players, and this really does help you think about your save, think about your signings, and help you keep your career mode transfers realistic. You don't always have to play in these divisions. They might have less leagues, they might have only 2 divisions in France for example, but it can take just as many seasons because there are better teams in those leagues to get promoted. If you find it too easy, why not create a club that is nowhere near good enough for that league? Give yourself no money and see if you can finally struggle your way to the top, using your excellent transfer knowledge and keeping it realistic the entire time for a tough, challenging and fun career mode save. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe for more like this. Thank you all for watching, like the video if you enjoyed it as well, and I'll see you soon for another video. Thank you and goodbye.